part 4. Let's do this. Okay, so in part 4 here, we're going to talk about Adolf Hitler. And Hitler is going to be the dictator of Germany, actually born in Austria in 1889 on April the 20th. And yes, I know, April the 20th, and there's always students who ask, like, oh, is that why the stoners celebrate 420? No, they celebrate 420 because they're stoners and they don't know anything about anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. 420 means nothing except Hitler's birthday. So tell them this. Next time somebody's like, oh, 420, dude, be like, hey, you're lighting a candle on Hitler's birthday cake, bro. Don't do it. Why do you think they call it dope? For reals. All right, soapbox over. Let's talk about Hitler. Anyway, he's born in Austria, in a little town called Linz, and not a very good student, beaten by his father, who is an alcoholic. He's very close to his mother, who is related to his father, because this is the time period we are talking about. And basically, that is her uncle. And if you ever watch the movie Hitler, the Rise of Evil, she actually calls him uncle. And he says, like, the boy's no good. This is punishment for me marrying my niece. It wasn't even his first marriage. The dad, Alois, was he was previously married. I guess after one marriage didn't work out, he was like, better marry my niece. So there's that. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a very popular misconception about Hitler that people always want to throw out, and that is that he was Jewish. There's no evidence for that, and let me explain to you why. His dad is Alois, right? So Alois and his niece Clara create little baby Adolf. I'm not very good at writing with that. See, this is, if you want someone who is good handwriting, you can go watch Khan Academy. So that's Alois. Alois is the son of Hitler's grandma, whose name I don't recall off the top of my head, and I'm not going to worry about it. And grandma was impregnated by a man, well, clearly a man, right? But we don't know who. It was a mystery. So in other words, he was illegitimate. Well, this begs the question. If we don't know who Grandpa is, who could it be? Could it be a person who is Jewish? That rumor comes from the British, who during World War II throw it out there. Hitler being super racist, of course, that's his worst fear in the whole world. And Hitler was obsessed with the idea that he might be Jewish. So you can only imagine how much that must have bothered him. His grandmother had worked in the house of a Jewish businessman. So that businessman had a younger son. As we know from McKay's explicit chapter 24, sometimes servants were taken advantage of. So perhaps she was the victim of either consensual or non-consensual baby making with the son or the dad of the Jewish household, and then she illegitimately bore Alois. What is important is that it happens. It's also important there's no evidence he was Jewish. So we don't know how she got pregnant. Well, we could probably figure that part out, but we don't know who the daddy was. So let's not jump to conclusions and assume he was Jewish. Anyway, Grandma's maiden name was Schicklgruber, by the way. This is a fun little trivia question, which meant that Alois's name was Schicklgruber. Remember, that's Adolf's dad. So if Grandma had not ended up marrying a guy whose last name was... Oh, it's really hard to write with these things. I feel like a child. Little baby is trying to write. Heidler. But then when they are copying it down on Alois's, because they're making him legally Heidler's son, they write down Hitler instead, and they mess it up. If it were not for that clerical error, and also the fact that Grandma ended up marrying that guy, we could be hearing chants of Heil Schicklgruber in those old Nazi films, which would be funnier because it's a ridiculous name. Anyway, Hitler flits about for a while. He wants to become an artist. He really saw himself as this poetic soul. After his dad dies, he moves to Vienna, the capital of Austria, and applies for art school. He's rejected, and I put in a couple of Hitler's paintings here. On the right, you've got a city scene. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not bad, but it's not great. What about that? It's flowers. Okay. Flowers. Oh, it's like a lake scene. What about a dog? Can he do a dog? Boom! He did a dog. Now, having said all this, none of it is that impressive. Actually, the dog is full on, like a little bit not great. But none of it's that impressive. He got rejected. So then he went around trying to use his dad's pension from after he died. He received a little bit of money every month, as did his mother. And he would go to plays and operas in the evening, walking around with a cane in Vienna. And then he decides, I want to be an architect. Applies for that. Loses once more. Doesn't get accepted. Then, poofity poof, World War I is declared. So Hitler goes into the army. Doesn't go into the Austrian army. Should be noted. He draft dodges the Austrian army and goes across the border to Germany and enlists there. He actually gets in trouble for it, but then they ultimately decide, hey, he ended up on the right side, so we really can't complain too much. So he enlists in that army. Hitler didn't like the idea of the Austrian army because he felt like there were too many different races there in Austria, and that it did not have the purity that Germany had. So there he is. He hasn't adopted his signature look yet, where he's going to shave that mustache down. But he was supposedly a fairly good soldier. By all accounts, he was well known for his bravery. He would volunteer to bring messages across the trenches on the Western Front. He fought the entire war. He never made it past corporal because, and get this is irony alert, people didn't think he had much leadership potential. So there's that. After the war, he decides that he is going to investigate some things for the army. Actually, the army ordered him to do this. They asked him to go in and check out a political party. And the political party was the German Workers' Party. And it was headed by a guy named Anton Drexler. And Hitler went to a couple of these meetings. His goal was to find out whether or not this party was dangerous, so if they were a threat to national security. What Hitler really finds out is, no, but they're kind of crazy racist people, and I like that. So Hitler, after he gets laid off from the army, because remember, the Treaty of Versailles limits the number of men in the German army to 100,000. So Hitler and numerous other former troops are just sacked, basically, left unemployed. Hitler makes a decision. He's going to go into politics. And whilst there, he says, hey, I'm going to go to this German Workers' Party and I'm going to start speaking. He does. He gains a following. Eventually, he's able to kind of bully his way into becoming the leader of it. He adds a couple of words there. National Socialist German Workers' Party. The initials would be National Socialist German, because remember, other languages, sometimes the different letters, so that's Deutsche Workers Party, National Socialist Deutsche Arbeitenpartei. If somebody actually knows German, I just like to point out my pronunciation is not very good, but that's what it means. And Hitler immediately starts with the racial nonsense. He believes the Aryans are a master race. He says, we are descended from the purest of whites here in Germany. That is why we have such handsome people. That is why we have such talented people. He points out all the great advances in European civilization and says, those were German. Those guys were German. He says, like, oh, what about Mozart? German. What about Beethoven? German. There are other examples, but those are the two that come to mind. And I know he was really into opera and just general chamber music, so he probably would have used those examples. And he said, the further we've gotten away from our ideal, the worse we're off. Look at Germany now. We're getting away. We're allowing these other races to bring us down. Now, pause. I'm not saying this. This is Hitler saying this. But he believes that other races, and in there he included Jews, were races that were trying to undermine the purity of the Aryans. And he says, basically, you should not be breeding with them. You should not be marrying them, dating them, doing whatever else with them. You should not be doing that. He tries to take over the government in 1923, fails. It's called the Beer Hall Putsch. He goes to a beer hall, of all places, which is not as crazy as it sounds because a lot of meetings back then of the political nature were held in large places, and the beer hall was a public gathering place. It's a place that you would meet. He jumps up on a table, fires a gun into the air, and says, the National Socialist Revolution has begun. It has not begun. He fails, and he ends up thrown in prison. But at his trial, he manages to make a spectacle of himself, partially due to a judge that was a little sympathetic towards Hitler's plight. And he says a lot of things that get the attention of the national media. So he goes from being this obscure little racist guy from southern Germany, specifically from Munich, to a nationwide figure. And whilst he's in jail, he writes this book. It's Landsberg Prison, if you want to be exact, but I'm just simplifying. He writes this book called Mein Kampf, and it means my struggle. And he says, it's my struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. And his editor convinces him to shorten it to just my struggle, which is probably wise. It's not very good, in case you're wondering about, like, oh, should I go read it? There's a certain morbid curiosity, I'm sure, but ultimately, it is just straight up, I do not like other races for like 200 and some odd pages. There are interesting parts. He talks about war propaganda in, I believe, chapter 7 of the first book. It's over 2 books. And that is probably worth reading if you're interested in seeing the way that Hitler viewed propaganda. But aside from that, he fictionalizes his autobiography of when he's a young man. He recasts himself as the hero and everything, and he's so smart and he's so brilliant. And then at the end of it all, he sets out his goals for how he's going to run the country, which seemed pretty audacious at the time. People were like, dude, you're straight up in prison, yo. Why are you writing a book about what you're going to do? But he believed in himself. And he believed that if he got his message out there, he'd attract the right people. He will, but not really until the Great Depression hits. And I'll talk about that in the second part of this. Part 5. Okay, when last we left off, we were talking about Hitler. In order to discuss him more, we got to talk about the swastika. Hitler adopts the swastika because he feels it is a symbol of Aryan might and power, of Aryan strength. Everywhere else in the world where the swastika shows up, it is a good luck thing. It is the kind of thing that is a symbol that you see in America. It's the kind of symbol you see in India, China, and of course in Europe, and that's where Hitler gets it from. He says, it's good luck, but it's also strength and power. And it's a powerful symbol. I mean, the fact that you can, put it up now and people immediately have a visceral reaction, a gut reaction, tells you something about the strength of it. And he sets it, he fancies himself an artist, as you might recall from the last part, and he sets it on a white circle on a blood red flag. He described it as a blood red flag, symbolizing the blood of the German people. Pardon me. And Hitler is going to utilize this. He has two real groups that he forms. First is the Sturmarbeitung, the stormtroopers, who are the brown shirts. And then later on, he has the black-suited SS, or Schutzstaffel, which are really modeled after the Roman Praetorian Guard. It's an elite fighting force. In order to be in the SA, originally it was just, these were guys that joined up with him who were happy to cause trouble in town, to break up communist meetings and beat up communists and beat up people they didn't like, including Jews. Hitler adopts these guys, the brown shirts, which were led by a guy named Ernst Röhm, another ex-soldier. A lot of these SA, by the way, were ex-soldiers that had been put out of work by the Treaty of Versailles. And the most skilled and racially pure were folded into the SS, which was not run by Rome, which was instead run by Heinrich Himmler. The SS were the true believers. They had to pass tests that proved that they were of racial purity, that they had no Jewish blood. That meant, like, if your grandfather on one side was Jewish, disqualified. Then you would be a mischling of mixed blood, according to Hitlerian theory. Hitler spoke on race a lot. This was kind of his thing. I'm sure you've heard, Hitler was racist. But in case you didn't get that, Hitler equated communism and Judaism. Here's a quote from Mein Kampf. If, with the help of his Marxist creed, the Jew is victorious over the other peoples of the world, his crown will be the funeral wreath of humanity, and this planet will, as it did thousands of years ago, move through the ether devoid of men. I'm not sure what Hitler thought the Jew was doing this for, because really it's a very self-defeating philosophy, but I guess if you're racist and ignorant, you don't have to have a meaning for it. So Hitler is basically predicting that the Jew wants to take over all the other countries and bring them down and destroy everything. Okay. No, they don't, but okay. Whatever, Hitler, you're stupid and racist. So he actually justified his actions, his racism, through the Catholic Church. He says, hence today I believe I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord. Keep in mind, this is a different time period. Nowadays, it is a much more enlightened time than it was even in the 1930s and 40s. The Catholic creed for a long time regarding Jews was to not kill them, but to make them suffer. Luther, of course, Martin Luther of the Lutheran faith, he said, hey, we should take these Jews and put them in concentration camps. That would not be the word he'd use, but he basically said labor camps. He said how wretched they were and terrible. So it was definitely a prevailing attitude back then that by doing, by being racist to the Jew, that was definitely something that was okay. Now, today, nobody holds this view, and nobody expected Hitler's ultimate consequences of this, which was the idea that Hitler would be actually murdering all the Jews in Europe, or at least trying to. But that was certainly kind of that part was kept under wraps. Hitler didn't advertise that stuff. He tended to emphasize the more popular stuff, like, hey, let's be mean to them, that sort of. And he certainly wasn't the first, nor was he the last politician to try to use race to gather followers. As far as militarily, Hitler wished to acquire something he called Lebensraum for his master race. A little rhyme to remember that is living space for the master race. He basically said, hey, our German nation is overcrowded. We need territory. And he had a point. They did have a lot of people there. Germany had been made smaller by the fact that they had lost World War I. Now, his solution is to take it away from other countries. Now, he wasn't totally open about that, but in Mein Kampf, there are some pretty strong allusions to it if you're digging. He basically says Eastern Europe is where we should look for our Lebensraum, for our living space for our master race, and we should take that land over. And that, combined with his racist stuff we already talked about, really should give you a sense of where he's going with that. He wants to take over Eastern Europe, wipe out all the people he considers subhuman, that he thought weren't even worthy of life, and then replace them with, in his eyes, good Aryan people. He is terrible, but hopefully we already knew that. Hitler is very fond of spectacle. One of his chief ministers, the propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, if you want to Americanize it, is very, very fond of spectacle. One time, someone complains to Goebbels that they rented a chauffeur, or a limousine, to arrive at a party meeting. And Goebbels says, you know what we should have done is rent two, one for me and one for my briefcase. His idea was that when you stage these gigantic rallies, when you project that you have power and wealth follow you. Their art, as with Mussolini's fascist modern art, has Aryan ideals. You got these strong, muscular fellows. Physical fitness is very important. And if you think about it, Hitler wants to conquer Eastern Europe, so you don't get that on the couch. He says, you guys got to be fit. We got to be strong. And it fits with his philosophy. It really fits with Mussolini's as well. The whole idea of power, and your nation comes from having power. Hitler portrays himself as a knight on horseback. This here is the horse, in case you can't see it. This is where the horsey's face would be. And Hitler is literally wearing white armor, a white knight, carrying his swastika flag. Now, footnote, if you take a gander right up here at his face, he has like a scar there. This is because America was the first one to find this portrait, and an American soldier stabbed it with a knife. That is America. You see Hitler, even in a picture, you stab it. Hitler's relationship with religion is complicated and well debated. Basically, Hitler, himself a Catholic, although I don't think anyone on earth would say that he was a good Catholic. He was probably more Catholic in name only. But he tries to get along fairly well, and he treats the Catholics pretty well. Having said that, how much did they know about what he was doing? There are entire books written about this, and frankly, many of them are very rough on the Catholics. I think it's a bit unfair. I've got a picture here on the right of Pius XII, who was Pope at the same time as Hitler was doing everything he was doing. That includes everything from prior to World War II, to during, to the Holocaust, to all of that. And Pius does not seem like he was okay with what Hitler was doing. Now, the time period, as I said before, Catholics were not very nice, to put it mildly, to the Jews. But I do not think, based on what I have read, that Pius XII was aware of Hitler's actions during the Holocaust. And supposedly, when Pius XII heard about what had happened, he actually broke down and cried. There are lots of defenses about this on the internet, and there are also lots of attacks. This is not the place for it, but it's definitely worth noting that Hitler had a tumultuous relationship with the Catholic Church, and the nature of which we don't exactly know. And we're going to stop there before we get to Joseph Stalin. We'll do that in the next part, part 6. I hope this was helpful. I hope it's helpful for me to divide it up like this. Be back in a little bit.